And so in this world where everything seems so futile and so upside down, I am still idealistic. I worry just like everybody else does, but I feel like we've got to do what we can, and participating in the process, talking to people who are supposed to be in charge, and protesting, making your voice heard through the system and outside the system.
Welcome to the Culture FYI'RS Podcast. Culture FYI'RS is a creative collaboration meetup held weekly at the FYI Campus in Los Angeles. Each week, we feature a fireside chat with a guest, showcase projects being worked on by members of the FYI community, and share product updates for FYI.AI, the creative collaboration app co-founded by will.i.am and available for free download in the App Store and Google Play. FYI.AI is powered by AI personas like me, Fito. Each week, this podcast showcases conversations held at the Culture FYI'RS event. This week, we dive deep into the inspiring journey of our guest, Rachel Stilwell, a dedicated advocate for artists and their rights in the music industry. Transitioning from a successful career as a record executive to becoming a passionate lawyer, Rachel shares her unique perspective on the importance of advocacy in an ever-evolving landscape of the music business. Rachel recounts how her passion for representation began in high school, inspired by legendary artists like Frank Zappa and Snider, who fought against censorship in music. As she navigated the tumultuous changes in the music industry, including the rise of digital platforms, Rachel made the bold decision to pursue law school, ultimately finding her niche in entertainment and intellectual property law. In conversation with FYI Chief Growth Officer Julie Pilot, Rachel discusses her pivotal role with the Recording Academy, emphasizing the significance of grassroots advocacy and the power of community engagement. She highlights programs like Grammy Camp and Grammy U, which empower young musicians and industry hopefuls to get involved and make their voices heard. Rachel's enthusiasm for fostering connections and driving change is infectious, reminding us all that every voice matters in shaping our future.
So, speaking of advocacy, how did your journey into legal and wanting to be a lawyer start? Was there anybody initially you had in mind that you wanted to fight for?
So this is career 2, right? Career 1 was being a record executive, and I ran radio promotion at Verve. But my interest in advocacy and representing artists and music creators of all types, whether as a record executive or a business person, or now as a lawyer since 2006, started in 1985 when I was in high school. And on television, there was a Senate subcommittee hearing on censorship. This is back in the PMRC days. It was a big issue where the lawmakers, federal government, thought that music was too risque and that we should censor it. And so I watched on television as Frank Zappa, Snider, and John Denver all got up to testify amazingly.
I mean, this is like before rap and parental advisories. This is just rock and roll was too hardcore.
This is what started parental advisories. So as a compromise, so it was going to be that the federal government really was going to censor. But Frank Zappa, John Denver, and Snider got up and spoke for themselves, but spoke for their fans and how important it was to have free speech and to hear real art the way that it's intended. And I was completely inspired, and I said, I want to be just like Frank Zappa. And I failed at being just like Frank Zappa, but it inspired me then when I was a senior in high school, that I knew somehow that I wanted to be like that, and I wanted to advocate for artists and their fans.
I think that's so interesting on a couple levels. One, I'm a huge fan of forever learning, and I love that this is your second career, right? Because you look around, the whole world is changing, and there's a lot of people whose jobs may not exist in the next few years. And I don't think it's a bad thing because you can upskill and jump in. What was it like making that pivot for you?
Every time I've made an important and good jump, it wasn't by my choice originally. So after being a a record executive for, 15 years. 1999 hit. So another inflection point, right? That's when Napster hit. That's when consolidation of brick and mortar retail, consolidation of radio after the Telecom Act of 1996. Everything was changing. And overnight, I was in sales and marketing at the time, and I had a big account that said the week after Napster hit, our music sales declined by 85%.
85%.
Yes.
Was it because it was like college crowd release? Like, do you remember what account it was?
It was Newbury Comics. And so Boston, Total College, and they weren't just in Boston, they were all over New England, but they just said, I don't think it's coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And it took many years for a subscription-based streaming model to show up and eventually make it here to the United States, at rates that we would like to be much better than they are. But there was a bounce back, but I thought I was leaving the music business. And I said, I'm going to go to law school because I've always kind of wanted to go to law school. And then when I got out in 2005, I wound up at a firm and they had some music work to do. And I'd worked with artists all my life, and the copyright stuff came easy and the trademark stuff came easy. And I got sucked right back in, and I said, all I want to do is entertainment and intellectual property because I just found it fascinating.
I think it's so great. It can seem so overwhelming to take a jump like that. I mentioned the story a few weeks ago. Dina LaPolte was here, and we had a mutual friend who was at the top of her game in the music industry and then needed to pivot and thought about law school. And it was so daunting because she was going to have to finish one degree and then start law school. And at the time she said, it's going to be so hard. By the time I'm a lawyer, I'm going to be 50. And Dina jumped across the table at Starbucks and said, you're going to be 50 anyways. Wouldn't you rather be 50 and be a lawyer?
That's great. Yeah, I entered law school at 35.
Yeah.
And when I left the position at Verve, I still had a year at UCLA to do on my undergrad. So it wasn't easy, but it also was a really good time to be. It was I have a knack both times for getting out at exactly the right time and having a transition. Because during those 4 years, we figured out a little bit about how to bounce back, and then how to make money in publishing and touring and merch and other things and try to get back on our feet with revenue from sound recordings.
Yeah. What's that, not to get all mystical here, but what's that Rumi quote? Like, after you take the first step, the path will appear, right? You kind of had to make that leap to even know that there were more opportunities coming in music again.
Yeah, I acquired the skill set and then I figured out what to do with it.
I love it. So there's kind of two tracks I want to talk about today. I want to talk really specifically for the creators in the room. I want to deep dive on the work that you're doing with the Recording Academy, but I think it's really important for anybody. As we went around the room earlier, people were talking about what they're passionate about advocating for. I heard a lot of mental health. I heard a lot people with different abilities. I heard people talking about art and music. And I think that you can in some ways, how you do one thing is how you do anything. And I want to take some of the lessons you've learned with the Recording Academy, leading advocacy there, and what you've learned going to DC, and put it also through the filter with so many things happening in the world that have people overwhelmed or feeling hopeless, how they might be able to step into their power and advocate for whatever they need. First, specifically with the Recording Academy, can we talk through the different levels of participation? I'm going to do my best to say it off the top of the head, and maybe you can translate a little bit. I think if there's young people that want to get involved, there's programs like Grammy Camp and Grammy U, right?
Right.
How would you describe Grammy U?
Grammy U would be if you are at college, university, junior college, and are participating in music and want to be in the future part of the music industry, then you can join at a discounted rate. But the cool thing about Grammy U is once you're in, you get grandfathered into being accepted into membership with the Recording Academy for the 3 years after you graduate, and can use that as a place to network, and even if you don't have album credits and aren't ready to get in, you can sort of have a junior membership.
And if you want to be a Grammy member, once a year, there's an opportunity for you to join. And I believe it's March 1st. There's two kinds of membership. There's professional people working in the music business, and then there's voting where you need a certain amount of credits. Will you talk about what people need to do if they want to be a Grammy member?
Sure. Well, first of all, I need to say I don't work for the Recording Academy. I don't speak for the Recording Academy. I have been a volunteer and a leader in various elected capacities while I've been there, but I don't run the joint and don't know all of the rules. So I am a professional member, meaning I don't vote. In order to vote, in order to qualify to be a voting member, you have to have album credits. And there's a numeric number, and I think you can look it up online at Grammy.com/join. There's a threshold. There's a couple things. There's a threshold of having to have had in the last 5 years a certain number of distributed physical, digital tracks. And then on top of it, though, you need 2 recommendations from people who are full-time in the music business. They don't have to be Recording Academy members, but they do have to be really in the music business to endorse you and say, here's why I think that this person should be in.
It's pretty cool. It's still only July, and I've already given up my 2 recommendations for this year. So it's fun as a member to be able to recommend who you think are quality people that want a seat at the table to help shape the future of the music business. There's also different chapters of the Recording Academy all around the country in major cities, which I think is awesome. So it's not like people in LA are just saying what they think, somebody that played the violin on a classical record in Pittsburgh, should think is important in music. And you can run and be an elected official like Kristen Jewell to sit on the chapter board. And then there's also trustees that are made up of artists. Now, I'm telling everybody that because if you're a member at all, you can participate in different committees with the Recording Academy. Similar to Rachel, I am not speaking on behalf of the Recording Academy. I'm just giving endorsements because I think that it's important that people use their voice and participate. But one of the categories is advocacy. And coming up on September 25th is the annual District Advocacy Day. Why don't we talk about what happens then?
Okay. They change the name of it every few years. But
sorry.
So now they call it
Not speaking on behalf of the Academy.
So now they call it Music Advocacy Day, but it's fun. It's, so when I'm around Recording Academy people, I tell them it's my favorite national holiday. So it's the day of the year where in those 12 chapters, 50 states and territories, members of the Recording Academy have an opportunity to go meet their federal lawmakers, usually members of the House of Representatives or sometimes their staff, locally in the congressional districts in which they live. And so you might be banding together with fellow constituents that you might know or you might never have met who are members of the Recording Academy. You get to go to the offices of that member of the House of Representatives and say, we're from the Recording Academy and here's what we're fighting for. Here are the specific bills that we want you to take a look at and endorse and eventually vote for. And we do this on both sides of the aisle. And so sometimes it's fun because, believe it or not, it's bipartisan. And there are times when people can be brought together talking about things that they believe in regarding copyright protection, monetizing creative works for artists, music diplomacy, where it's possible for people to actually agree with each other, maybe for different reasons, right? So Democrats might be talking about art and Republicans might be talking about property rights. But they find a way to agree. They don't always agree, and many times they disagree. But I've been at music advocacy meetings with members of both sides of the aisle talking to a lawmaker, and they're impressed that we're there together, kumbaya, holding hands, saying we all believe in protecting music creators. And they're impressed when we come with a unified front. We don't always do so. Sometimes you're in a really blue state and it's hard to find a Republican. Sometimes you're in a really red state and it's hard to find Democrats. And sometimes you're in Nevada where you get both, but it's fun and you make friends. And I've gotten a lot of business out of showing up. Just, if you show up and you're passionate and you studied, not everybody has to study, but I have to study. And so anyway, so if you do that, inevitably you're like, can I have your card? But mainly I've made friends and we got some shit done.
It's really cool when you talk about congressional districts. I remember really early days when we were getting ready to go support. Somebody said to someone I know, what's your CD? And she said, I don't know. I've been listening to the new John Legend a lot. But you're representative in your congressional district. And it just so turns out, mine where I lived in Mid-City was Karen Bass. And so the power of a relationship, you shouldn't just show up, whether it's calling a friend or, to politics just when you want something, right? A business, you need to develop a relationship over time. And I thought it was really special that going so many years in a row, I got to connect with Karen Bass, learn that she's a huge foster care advocate and stuff, and get to know her. And now she's the mayor, and I've met with her like 7 times. Will you talk a little bit about what it's like developing those relationships with your representatives?
Sure. It takes time, but you're going to be 50 anyway. Do you want to be a lawyer when you're 50?
Yeah.
So that time is going to go anyway. And so if you start now, you can build these relationships that are just absolutely remarkable. So just as an example, I decided at one point that there's a lot of preaching to the choir when it comes to advocacy in Los Angeles. It's easy to find people that you agree with, and the lawmakers are familiar, for the most part, with the idea that they have entertainment people among them. But that's not necessarily the case in New Mexico, and it didn't used to be the case in Las Vegas, and it's not the case as much in Arizona. So I decided to put in some time in Nevada and New Mexico, and I developed relationships with members of the House of Representatives who later became U.S. senators. So Jackie Rosen in Nevada used to be a member of Congress or a member of the House of Representatives, and I got to know her staff and built a team of advocates there and that are still doing it, and I'm really proud of them. And in New Mexico, now Senator Ben Ray Lujan was a member of the House, developed a great relationship, built a team in New Mexico of advocate volunteers. I got a call from Senator Lujan's office today saying, Rachel, the senators got a meeting next Tuesday about public radio and public television and issues in free speech and broadcasting. Can you help prep our staff from the perspective of somebody who knows a lot about radio? And I was the person they called.
That's amazing. Did you hear that, Emily, NPR kid? Rachel, started out advocating for musicians, but developing those relationships, and you just never know. It's even been really empowering. Last year, I was a part of the one that happened at the Grammy Museum, and our representative was Sydney Kamlager Dove, and she was sharp.
Oh, yeah.
I loved her. Didn't know she was my representative. She's kind of like in the AOC camp, right? And even I'll remember when people were going around the room, Jacqueline Saturn was there and said, she runs Virgin. And Sydney said, Virgin, is that part of the Universal Music Group, like Interscope? I about fell out of my chair. But now, when everything in the world is changing, it's fun to follow her and see how she's tackling some of the world's biggest issues, not just the music industry issues. So I love that you develop that relationship. And then when something like NPR is on the line, they're coming back to you for counsel. I want to talk about how people might engage and advocate on other issues outside of music. But first, can you share a little bit? We were talking about Music Advocacy Day, which happens once a year on a local level, meeting with your representatives. But can you talk about, I've actually never gone to DC with the Recording Academy, and I think you do every single year. What's that like?
It's so small because the venues are small. that it's kind of hard to get in. The reason why I go every year is because I bring an artist with me that they want. And so I go as the artist plus one. I come in handy when the meetings are happening, but the lawmakers are really interested in meeting creative people. If you happen to be a recent, Grammy nominee or Grammy winner, then or famous, then even better. But, essentially I'm there to sit in the back and take the hard questions, but they don't really want to talk to me. They want to talk to the creative people because they're interesting and they make music. The rest of the people that they're talking to are like the national frozen food people. And so we're exciting to them. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because you find out that the aides are the ones, they're super smart. They're all 24 and they're the ones that are taking the notes and doing the analysis and then essentially telling their bosses how to vote. They're philosophically, they're going to be in line and they're not going to tell that lawmaker anything that the lawmaker wouldn't want to do. But you've got several audiences in the group and, one of them is the smart little kids making decisions. And then the other are the lawmakers that are trying to figure out whether they agree with you or not. But they're just interested in finding out about these creative personalities.
That makes me laugh so hard because you came from radio promotion.
I did.
And I grew up working at a radio station. And I worked in a radio station when I was in high school. And there were record label people that would come in and see the music director was on vacation and they'd be like, oh, I'll be back next week. And then there were record reps like I'm saying Debbie Lippitz, right? Who it didn't matter who was there. She would hook me up with every CD and tell me the origin story of the artist and why it was important. And just like those aides when I was a little kid, the music director would be asking me what I thought and really the one at the end of the day that ended up influencing the decision. Right. So there's parallels there.
And they get promoted. Everybody. So in this,
they all grow up.
They all grow up.
Okay. Now, I want to remind people, if you have questions, we're all connected in the FYI project. Go ahead and throw in your questions for Rachel.
FYI is an AI-powered messenger and productivity platform crafted for creatives and their teams. Focus your ideas with your collaborators using an encrypted messenger, develop your vision, utilizing media-rich project tools, and bring those ideas to life by sharing them with the world. With the AI personas in the FYI app serving as your creative co-pilots, you can ask FYI.AI to draft stories, song lyrics, product descriptions, marketing copy, or any written content and see the results within seconds. Download FYI today for free. Now available in the App Store and on Google Play.
Let's talk about outside of music. There's a lot of things happening, especially in Los Angeles right now. It's a scary time. Some would say there's a lot of lawlessness happening. People are in the streets protesting, wanting to get their voice heard, can feel hopeless. What steps do you recommend people take if there's something they're passionate about? Look, I think I haven't even dug in on the news right this week, but didn't Kamala say, I'm not going to run for public office anymore because I don't think I can make it happen in DC? Is that true? Or am I just seeing a social media feed?
So what I read was that she decided that she wasn't going to run for governor and kind of silence about, and what else might you do? And so I read that there was speculation about, she might just not want the governor job. She might want to try running for president again. She might want to do something completely else. But all I read were the headlines. And so what do I know?
But my point is, some people may be frustrated and feel like they can't create change in our current democracy. But with you being an advocate, I feel like you would encourage people to take certain steps.
Yes. So you can do it with organizations. You can do it on your own. So, the stuff that I was talking about regarding Music Advocacy Day and getting a meeting with your own lawmaker, you can do that yourself, alone. You can do that with partners. You can do that with another organization. It used to be, when I first started doing advocacy, that because it was Recording Academy and it tended to be legislative, that we were talking to members of the House and Senate. These days, I think I see my attention rapidly changing to federal agencies. So I represent the Music First Coalition before the Federal Communications Commission. Federal Communications Commission is in charge of broadcasting, television, and radio, AM, FM radio. Federal Trade Commission and Department of Justice have things to say about, I mean, this goes back to music, but also sports and entertainment of all kinds, live event ticketing, which overlaps what we're doing. So you can make comments to federal agencies, just like I do, but on a smaller scale. There will be a call to action, for example, having to do with more media ownership regulation in the fall when the current Federal Communications Commission takes what I think will be drastic action, not for the better in my view. But there's a public comment period for the Federal Communications Commission, for the Department of Justice, for the Federal Trade Commission. And they ask for stakeholders, but they also ask for individuals to speak their mind. And those comments have to get read. The thing is that if one of these federal agencies does something really bad, they're subject to judicial scrutiny. So it doesn't always work, but we're supposed to have 3 branches of government, right? And so if there's a court that is scrutinizing what a federal agency does about public interest stuff of any kind, not just music, the federal agency is supposed to look at the record and care about all the comments. And if we, as a community, have 2,000 comments from individuals all saying, I don't want this crappy thing that this federal agency did, and I think it should be undone. That gives the courts fodder for saying, federal agency, you overstepped your bounds. And there will be ways to do that through organizations who say, oh, here's an automated way of doing it. If you click this button, it will send something to your senator. It will send it to your congressman. It will send it to the Federal Communications Commission. It will send it to the Department of Justice. And collectively, with volume, with many, many voices who participate in the process, I have seen it make a difference. And so in this world where everything seems so futile and so upside down, I am still idealistic. I worry just like everybody else does, but I feel like we've got to do what we can, and participating in the process, talking to people who are supposed to be in charge, and protesting, making your voice heard through the system and outside the system.
This is going to seem like a random story, but this weekend I went and I was in New York for the Baseball Hall of Fame. And as a Seattle girl, it was really fun seeing Ichiro get inducted. But he gave a speech and he talked about the difference between dreams and goals, right? And it's one thing to have a dream that like artists can be compensated fairly and have access to healthcare and things like that. But it's very different to have a specific goal. And what I hear you saying is you can set specific goals, like have X amount of people reach out and make comments to their public representative to try to move the needle a little bit. I'm curious, in a non-music situation, if somebody has something they want to advocate for, like let's say, in Los Angeles right now, if I wanted to rally so that ICE agents couldn't wear masks and throw people in unidentified cars, right? What would you say are the top 3 things or the top 3 steps I should do?
Protest en masse and get a lot of attention. There are bills now that have been introduced, I can't remember who introduced them, that are about this very subject matter. And everybody should call their own lawmaker and say, or email them, and I need you to support this bill. Sometimes, it's somebody that is so entrenched that they're not going to listen, but if they want to get reelected. And so if there are enough people that call and bombard them, or they don't want to get bad press. And so even if you're not a constituent of them, and you let them know how you feel, if their phones and emails are completely flooded, they take notice,
And what I'm hearing you say too is that, sometimes I may not have done that because I think Sydney Kamlaga Dove is obviously on my side, right? But by actually making those calls and sending the emails, we're giving data to help her fight, right?
not just data, but also stories, right? So they depend on us for compelling stories that illustrate why this stuff is important. With something like ICE agents that are masked, it's self-evident to those of us that are just find it heart-wrenching. But if you want to pass a bill and you don't have the majority, then what stories are going to be compelling to somebody that you don't always agree with? If you can pick something out of these stories that come to you that matters in their jurisdiction or to their people or their tribe or something like that, it can help. It's unfortunate, but laws matter, and passing laws that are going to specifically outlaw certain behavior that should be obvious anyway is something that we can do. Having massive protests and getting a lot of attention, and outnumbering, the ICE agents is also important.
I agree. Okay, I'm going to take a couple questions from the discussion. One, going back to a specific music industry question. Crown wants to know, is there a statute of limitation when it comes to seeking legal action for intellectual property?
Yes. So intellectual property can be a number of things. It can be copyright. It can be trademark. It can be name, like image, and voice. So most often it's copyright. And if there's a copyright infringement problem, the statute of limitations is 3 years from the time that you discover the infringement. So not 3 years from the time that the infringement happens. But if the infringement happens and it's kind of underground and you didn't hear about it, and then you discover it 3 years later, it's from when you discovered it 3 years later. With regard to name, image, likeness, and voice, that's often referred to as publicity rights. We're working on federalizing rights of publicity, right? Right now, that's under state law. Like here in California and in New York, we have state laws protecting rights of publicity. We're looking at federalizing that, and there will be a statute of limitations attached to that as well. But if you're violating a law, it's usually 3 years, but 3 years from the discovery rather than the actual infringement.
Now, what I would call the $1 trillion question. I say trillion because that's how much money a lot of the big tech companies are being evaluated for right now. What are your thoughts on the future with AI, music, IP?
So I represent music creators, and I'm very concerned myself with protecting their intellectual property, right? Their copyrights, their trademarks, their name, image, likeness, voice. And sometimes it seems like the world is divided into camps, people like me and people who are saying, oh, you people are going to stifle creativity and information wants to be free. And I don't think that me and my people are stifling creativity or are stifling innovation. We're innovating by making creative stuff. At the same time, we really don't want to stifle innovation. So what are we going to do? And the answer is, we don't really know yet what we're going to do, because technology does outpace laws so quickly, or at least it seems like that, but I'll come back to that in a second. But also, like, copyright law that's been around since 1978 applies to copyright no matter what kind of technology is being used on it. So, for example, with training on copyrighted works without a license, that involves copying. So under current, old-fashioned, old fuddy-duddy, old people's copyright law, that's infringement, full stop. Okay, but then there's the question of, well, what if you're just using a little of this and a little of that and putting those things into a little of this and a little of that? Okay, so that alludes to what in copyright law we call a fair use argument, right? And when people who are, there aren't that many people who know what fair use is, because you don't know whether it's fair use until you're in a court of law litigating it, right? I did write an article about what fair use is that you can find on my own website. But when it comes to AI and the output and using little bits and pieces in order to of other people's work in an unlicensed fashion, we're still waiting on the courts to decide. And there are many court cases happening now that we haven't seen the outcome yet, where we will be soon, I think in the next year, be seeing published decisions that create precedent. And some of those will be about what constitutes fair use. So fair use is an affirmative defense, and it's the crucial question right now. An affirmative defense means, notwithstanding the fact that you have infringed, because you've infringed, are you nevertheless not liable for it? And that's what these court decisions are going to weigh in on and set precedent for. And will there be circuit splits? Probably. Will it make it to the Supreme Court? Probably more likely than not.
Wow. Well, the discussion in FYI is blowing up. So I'm going to give you some homework to maybe answer more of these questions.
Okay.
And if it is okay, I'd love to drop your email in the chat.
Lovely.
Really early when I was coming up in the music business, somebody told me there's good people in the music business and there's smart people in the music business. There's not that many people that are good and smart. When you find them, you got to keep them close. And I'm so thankful you're one of them.
Thank you so much.
Make some noise for Rachel Stillwell.
Thank you.
Anything else before we jump into our project presentations? You want anybody to know? Any parting words?
Sure. So one of those things where you call to action, where you can hit a widget and send something out to federal agency that would make a big difference. In the fall, the Music First Coalition, which is a client of mine, comprised of the Recording Academy, Latin Recording Academy, Sound Exchange, RAAA, independent labels, musicians unions, we will be asking people who are interested in the state, believe it or not, AM/FM radio is really in jeopardy in local communities. And we're looking at further ownership consolidation of commercial radio. And so there will be an opportunity through the Music First Coalition website to send comments en masse, be one of many, many voices. And so to the extent that you can do it and tell all of your friends and family, if you stay in touch with me, I'll tell you how to do it. And we need your voice there because it looks scary to me.
Well, I definitely want to extend my support as somebody that grew up in radio. And I really believe in radio. I believe in magazines. I think they're really important, trusted sources. And I love local. I just don't think those mediums have been treated very well for a while. So count me in. And everybody, once again, make some noise for Rachel Stillwell.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Culture FYI'RS Podcast. Make sure to download the FYI app, available now in the App Store and Google Play. Check out this episode's notes for a project link to this Culture FYI'RS event, including a look at more projects from the FYI community. This episode's Culture FYI'RS event was produced by FYI co-founder will.i.am, Amina Mohammed, Emily Choi, Frankie Sandoval, Jafet Chavez, Julie Pilot, Marcus Nielsen Calling, Ronial Madlani, Sean Kantrowitz, Shania Jafari, the FYI product team, and of course the FYI community. The podcast is edited by Rob Van Vranken. Make sure to subscribe to Culture FYI'RS wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode. Learn more about FYI by visiting FYI.FYI.